Spawned in the darkest pits of the universe, the piratical Eldar are a curse upon all races of the galaxy. For untold thousands of years, they have preyed upon us, stealing forth from the shadows and dark places on their raids of terror and violence, massacring or capturing all whose paths they cross. That they are utterly evil and inhuman is without question. From High Lord Kuron, the Imperial Commander of Asthirax. The Drukhari are black-hearted reavers, to whom the galaxy and all of its peoples are but cattle to be enslaved at will. These alien pirates strike hard and fast from the shadows of the webway, vanishing again before the foe can fight back. They are a twisted reflection of their craft-world kin. They dwell in the strange realm known as the Webway, inhabiting Komorag, a cyclopean interdimensional metropolis rightly feared as the Dark City. They feed on negative emotion, dedicating themselves to a non-stop war with the peoples of real space, in which they strive to inflict as much pain and misery as they possibly can. Forced through a dark quirk of fate to abandon the once potent psychic abilities of their Eldari ancestors, the Drukhari instead epitomize physical excellence. Their athleticism and speed are unmatched, except perhaps by their towering arrogance. Add to this their lethal arcane science, and the Drukhari are amongst the greatest of threats in an already deadly galaxy. 10,000 Terran years ago, amid the apocalyptic screams of a newborn god, the mighty Eldari Empire fell to ruin. Yet the architects of this catastrophe were spared the worst of its wrath, hidden deep within the bounds of the Webway. They lurk there still, a race of unrepentant monsters, damned to suffer an eternal thirst for the pain of others. The Drukhari have fallen from true grace in the most profound of ways. Their roots as a culture lie at the very height of ancient Eldari society, when theirs was perhaps the most highly advanced species in the Milky Way galaxy. The Eldari once boasted mastery over an interstellar civilization that was the greatest seen in the galaxy since that of the Old Ones. The various cultures of the Eldari that exist today in the 41st millennium are only shadows of the glory of that ancient Eldari empire. The true origins of those who now call themselves the Drukhari can be found in hidden enclaves amidst the atrocity and mayhem of the terrible time of the fall of the Eldari, the great cataclysm that nearly destroyed the entire Eldari species. It was an event so terrible that not only did it kill trillions of Eldari, but it breached the dimensional barrier between real space and the warp and gave birth to the chaos god Slanesh. The ancient Eldari had perfected their science and technology to such an extent that they could remake planets and quench the light of the very stars at a whim. The need for labor or hard work in their society became nothing but a dim memory of a difficult past. The Eldari, arrogant in the belief that they were now the true masters of their destiny, spent more and more of their time in esoteric pursuits and entertainments intended to escape the ennui that set in over the course of their centuries-long lives of ease and comfort. Their mind and psyche is a thing of duality. it can experience zeniths of bliss and nadirs of suffering far more keenly than that of the other intelligent starfaring races of the galaxy, including mankind. They were capable of becoming just as irredeemably corrupt as they were of transcending their flaws and touching the divine. With so much power at their hands, the core worlds of their empire, once the height of civilization in the known universe, became centered solely on the pursuit of individual fulfillment and self-gratification. To understand the reasons for the fall, it is necessary to know something of the Eldari mind and soul. An Eldari's mind is incredibly complex. Their senses are extremely sharp, able to perceive incredible levels of detail. Their emotions can be so strong that a human's are merely pale shadows by comparison. They are extremely intelligent. Their thought processes are much faster than a human's. All of this means that an Eldari experiences the universe and all its sensations to a greatly heightened degree compared to a human. Similarly, an Eldari's soul is much brighter in the warp than those of what they call lesser sentients, like humans who do not possess such potent psychic abilities. The Eldari are able to affect the nether realm of the immaterial much more than most other intelligent peoples. Every Eldari is a latent psychic and has the ability to become a very powerful psyker with training. It is the psychic strength of the Eldari soul that was one of the primary causes of their downfall. Before the fall, during humanity's dark age of technology, the Eldari had an immense galaxy-spanning empire comprising thousands of worlds, and some claim that it was larger and more powerful than even the Imperium of Man at the height of its power. The Eldari lived in relative peace. Barbarian races such as the Orcs were kept at easily manageable numbers and never had the strength to threaten the might of the Eldari Empire. The humans were not yet virulently xenophobic and did not have a large interstellar domain, and the Tyranid hive fleets remained unknown. The Catan and Necrons, the ancient foes of the Eldari, had been defeated long before and still remained dormant in the midst of their great sleep. Life on the Eldari core worlds was idyllic, with fantastically sophisticated machines that took care of all the labor and manufacturing required to keep an advanced society functioning, leaving the Eldari free to indulge in other, more aesthetic pursuits. With all menial work taken care of for them, they became indolent and decadent. They began to explore more deeply the arts of pleasure, delving ever deeper into hedonism. This descent into decadence spanned Terran millennia. Tradition and order disintegrated as the Eldari pursued the limits of pleasure. Sects called pleasure cults were formed, dedicated to achieving the highest levels of hedonistic sensation. Their ceremonies and practices became ever more wild, eventually devolving to violence against one another and even the ritual sacrifice of their own kind. Some Eldari hated what their race had become and left their homeworlds for the unexplored and virgin maiden worlds, or left on the newly constructed craft worlds, leaving the pleasure cults to their madness. Among the pleasure seekers and the interminably curious of the Eldari were those whose pursuit of excess became ever more extreme. These included a great proportion of the aristocracy of ancient Eldari society who possessed the wealth and time to truly explore the meanings of decadence. One by one, the leaders of the pleasure cults that were becoming the centerpiece of Eldari society became obsessed with their own power and gratification. They relocated their headquarters to the labyrinth dimension known as the Eldari Webway, for so great was their political influence that they could command the construction of entire extra-dimensional sub-realms just for themselves. Unseen, these pleasure cult lords continued to grow in power and influence, initiating more and more of the ancient Eldari population into their strange and shadowy creed of decadence. The Eldari are the most psychically gifted of all sentient beings in the galaxy, and as the hedonistic corruption gradually seduced them, the echoes of their ecstasy and agony began to ripple through time and space. In the parallel dimension of the Imperium, the warp, the reflections of these intense experiences began to coalesce. As the shifting tides of the chaotic Empyrean can take form around the raw emotions emitted by the sentient beings of the material universe and attract even more of such similar psychic energies to themselves. The constant stream of individual selfishness and indulgence pouring into the warp from the Eldari Empire nourished and empowered that which lay within, a nascent god of pleasure and pain, content to wait and to grow. As the Eldari Empire sank into corruption, decadence, brother turned against brother in pursuit of ever more extreme and darker pleasures, some of the wiser Eldari foresaw the disaster that was approaching their society and fled from the core worlds to safety. The first of these were the Exodites, who chose to establish a network of Eldari planetary colonies known as the Maiden Worlds, far from the blighted heart of the Empire. Many of these still exist in the galaxy, their cultures living in a symbiotic relationship with the world spirits of the planets they call home and protect. Among the last Eldari to escape from the Empire's core before the fall were the ancestors of the present day's Craftworld Eldari. As their society collapsed into civilization-wide insanity, these Eldari recoiled in horror from what they were becoming. Realizing that they stood upon the brink of destruction, they bent their considerable resources to the construction of the massive craft worlds, the graceful, space-borne cities that were the size of small moons. These Eldari retreated into aestheticism and spiritual introspection, preserving what they could of their ancient ways and culture before the time of the pleasure cults. They left the core worlds of the Empire behind for the dubious safety of deep space, to the laughter and contempt of those who remained behind. Some even managed to flee far enough to escape the terrible destruction that was to come. Within the warp, the constant stream of indulgence and depravity pouring from the Eldari Empire became as unstoppable as a tide. It nourished and empowered that which crystallized at its center, a nascent god of excess and amoral pleasure-seeking. The long millennia of Eldari hedonism had made a massive impact in the psychic realm of chaos. Within the warp, the decadent Eldari civilization was giving shape to a new, major power of chaos, which grew and grew over thousands of Terran years, getting stronger and more defined until suddenly it sparked into a malevolent intelligence, a shatteringly huge and malign being with an immense and bottomless thirst for Eldari souls. This was the birth of the Chaos God Slaanesh, the Dark Prince of Pleasure, better known as She Who Thirsts to the Eldari and all their descendants, for to them, Slaanesh was inherently female. This process of psychic gestation lasted for thousands of standard years, corresponding to the historical era that was mankind's Age of Technology and Age of Strife, although when Slaanesh finally came into being, the results within the material universe were apocalyptic and sudden. As depravity riddled every aspect of Eldari society, the pleasure cult sought ever more violent thrills. Before long, the streets of Eldari cities ran with their blood. The once elegant architecture of their palaces became battlegrounds as the Eldari preyed upon each other, reveling in the cruelest of crimes. Their insanity and tainted passions poured into the warp until it finally achieved critical mass. With an apocalyptic bellow that tore the heart out of the Eldari Empire, a new Chaos God was born, Slaanesh, the Dark Prince of Excess. An almighty psychic shockwave skithed across the galaxy, destroying countless billions of Eldari souls as its birth cries echoed through the material realm. The souls of almost every Eldari were stripped from them in an instant and devoured by the newborn Chaos God in a cataclysm of pain and terror. There were few survivors. Most Eldari were driven mad, their minds trapped half in the real world and half in the swirling insanity of the warp. A great warp rift was created in the material universe at the site of what had once been the center of the Eldari civilization, encompassing almost the entire Eldari Empire and creating the Eye of Terror, thus marking the end of the era known to humanity as the Age of Strife. World after Eldari world had fallen into the warp, to later be known as the Crone Worlds. Slaanesh, meanwhile, gorged itself upon their horror and despair. Unstoppable in its ascendancy, the new god consumed the ancient deities of the Empire and scattered their psychic remains to the far corners of the Imperium. The Eldari civilization was gone. All that was left of their species were the exodites of the farthest flung maiden worlds, the craft-world Eldari who had traveled far enough to escape the aftershock of destruction caused by Slaanesh's birth and the formation of the Eye of Terror, and those adherents of the pleasure cults who were hidden in the sub-realms of the Webway. Much of the Webway was shattered into ruin by the fall, but unlike the craft-world Eldari who fled the catastrophe in real space, those Eldari who had built their own jealously guarded empires in the Webway remained physically unaffected by Slaanesh's birth. The echoes of the new god's apotheosis still resounded within them, but unlike their kin in real space, they had escaped destruction. In their arrogance, they did not end their quest for excess and decadent pleasure, not even for a momentary respite following the death of their empire. Repentance and atonement were meaningless concepts for a people that no longer acknowledged any limits on their actions, regardless of the consequences. The change that was wrought upon those Eldari sealed within the webway was far more subtle. Rather than having their psychic essences, their souls consumed in one great draught by Slaanesh, their souls slowly drained away into the warp, taken over time by She Who Thirsts. The Eldari hate and fear Slaanesh above all other things, for she was given life by their actions, and yet she waits hungrily to claim each and every one of them, now or later. Where the Eldari of the Craft World learned to deny Slaanesh's hold upon them by using the mystical spirit stones, the infinity circuits, and the philosophies of the Asuryani path to safeguard their souls from consumption, the Eldari of the Webway became exceptionally good at ensuring that other beings suffered in their place. As long as they steeped themselves in the most evil and savagely decadent acts, the Eldari of the Webway found that the curse of Slaanesh upon their people could be avoided. The psychic energy generated by the suffering and agony of others nourished their diminished souls and kept them vital and strong, filling their spare frames with unnatural, robust energies. Assuming that they could feed regularly enough upon the miseries of other intelligent beings, these Eldari became psychically immune to the passage of time, earning a twisted form of immortality. And so it was that the Drukhari were born, a race of sadistic murderers and fiendish torturers who feed upon the suffering of others in order to prevent the slow death of their own immortal souls. 10,000 standard years later, in the 41st millennium of mankind, Slaanesh's thirst consumes them still. There truly is no escape, for the Drukhari have only exchanged a horrible but quick death for an eternity of infernal hunger and the infinite emptiness wrought by self-absorption and pure, amoral selfishness. Komorragh was originally the greatest of the Webway port cities, impossibly vast and able to transport a fleet to any of the most vital planets of the Eldari Empire by virtue of its many portals. Because of the access it granted to the far-flung corners of real space, this mighty metropolis was reckoned to be the most important location in the entire Webway. It was too valuable to the Eldari as a whole to belong to any single aspect of their empire, and so it existed outside the jurisdiction of the great Eldari councils of that time. Precisely because of its autonomy, the Webway city port quickly became a magnet for those that wished their deeds to remain hidden from prying eyes. The realm of Komorragh expanded unstoppably as wealth flowed across its borders. It spread outward into the void, consuming other Webway port cities, private estates, and sub-realms with each new expansion. It grew ever larger and more impressive as it fed on their plundered resources. Unseen, the dilettante lords who ruled Komorragh's spires and dens of vice grew in status alongside their adoptive city, initiating more and more of the Eldari species into their shadowy creeds. Deep in the Webway after the fall, the groups of pleasure cult survivors came together and laid the foundations of the vast new subrealm that they named Commorragh, the Dark City, which was built on the foundation of the ancient Eldari port city within the webway of the same name that had lain outside the jurisdiction of all the Eldari authorities of their lost empire. As more and more Eldari survivors from other subrealms in the webway began to arrive, they soon added their own regions to the new realm, slowly making it even larger and more heavily populated until it became what it is today, a vast domain, an infernal city of suffering and death. To this day, the Drukhari raid and pillage the galaxy at large from their hidden subrealms in the webway, sowing as much misery and destruction as possible and stealing away millions of captive slaves to their lairs within the Dark City to be exploited for their own horrible ends. They are experts in the techniques of torture, as well as mental and physical degradation, as the longer a Drukhari can drag out the torture of a slave, the more psychic nourishment they can take from him or her. A Drukhari who has recently fed upon the suffering of others shines with a cold and startling aura of power, their physical form restored to beautiful, youthful perfection, even as their soul rots within its pristine shell. One who is not allowed to partake of such dark psychic energies for long enough will eventually become a physical shadow of their former beauty, desperately hunting for a taste of misery to stave off the gnawing thirst in the depths of their own withered soul. If a traveler were somehow to breach Commorragh's ruining wards, they would first bear witness to the Dark City's tributary realms, shimmering and distorting around it. One minute, these vassal domains glimmer in the distance. The next, they loom so close that their palaces and minarets can be seen by the naked eye. To venture unheralded past these satellite realms is to invite destruction. Many large and territorial cabals of Drukhari reside within their twisted geometries, deadly pirate bands of pitiless warriors who live only to inflict pain on others and will suffer no intrusion on their realms. Worse things lurk in their crooked shadows, or swoop swiftly and silently through the air above in their never-ending hunt for prey. These are the hidden domains in which the Drukhari enact their vile rites and devilish schemes. Their origins lie in the tumultuous times that preceded the fall as the cults of excess began to thrive. Their private realms in the webway flourished unseen until the largest of their number grew powerful enough to threaten Commorragh itself. How typical that the humans should rely upon crude technology to protect them. How fitting that we, the Dark Eldar, should kill them where they feel safest. From Kregeth of the Slaughtered Heart. Drukhari, like most Eldar kindreds, make use of advanced technology, including anti-gravity devices, dark matter weaponry, nanotechnology, and psychic artifacts. While they do make use of psychic devices, they do not any longer use psychic powers themselves, because of the danger that interacting with the warp brings for those whose souls are desired by Slaanesh. Psykers are treated as playthings in Commorragh, and given the twisted, sadistic nature of the Drukhari, this necessarily involves pain and torment for them. Though it is manufactured rather than physically grown from the hardened substance of the warp like the wraithbone implements of the craft world Eldari, the Drukhari weaponry is just as technologically advanced as that of their more benevolent counterparts. When it comes to war, the Drukhari are veritable artists. Their technology is refined to the point that some of its effects appear as nothing less than magical to less advanced intelligent species like humanity. Their infinite, if infinitely dark, imaginations and sheer skill have led them down a sinister path. Their favorite weapons can set every nerve ending afire with pain, dark light beams, whips that bleed acid, and eldritch soul traps. They are so confident of their own abilities that their lightweight suits of body armor incorporate bladed plates not only for protection, but also to provide them with yet another weapon to inflict pain. The warriors of Komorah are well versed in the physiology and anatomies of all the other starfaring species of the galaxy, knowledge that is used to inflict the maximum amount of pain, suffering, and death. They employ a number of handheld weapons designed to eviscerate, lacerate, and incise at close quarters. Although varying wildly in design and use, all employ a similar technology in their construction. They are built from very lightweight materials, with blades honed to a molecular edge capable of cutting through even ceramite armor plating when sufficient force is employed. Weapons incorporating powerful shock fields have also been recovered by Imperial forces, and these devices utilize an energy generation and transference systems as yet beyond the comprehension of human tech adepts. Over the millennia, Komorah grew from its shrouded beginnings into a galactic nightmare, its expansion driven largely by the machinations of one being, Asdrubael Vect of the Cabal of the Black Heart, who rose from slavery to become the true, supreme overlord of the Dark City. 4,000 standard years after the fall of the Eldari, in the time that mankind calls the 35th millennium, Komorah underwent its greatest ordeal since its founding. The Dark City was to be subjected to a full-scale invasion by some of the Imperium's most elite warriors. This catastrophic battle saw the rule of the ancient Eldari noble houses of the city brought crashing down. They would be replaced by a city of cabals under the rule of Supreme Overlord Asdrubael Vect, the architect of this time of strife. He began his days as an Eldari slave, yet through pure guile and murderous ambition, he eventually rose to become the leader of a militant organization that he named the Cabal of the Black Heart. By the time he had established this power base, he had been recognized by the Drukhari's true-born aristocracy as a genuine threat. The Cabal of the Black Heart was opposed at all turns by the most influential of High Komorah's noble houses, Zelian, Krylak, and Ilithian. So it was that Vect, ever the master of turning foe against foe to his own advantage, concocted a plan to bring the fury of the Imperium of mankind to bear against his many enemies. So audacious was this scheme that, to the eyes of most, it would have seemed like a horrific gamble. This could not have been further from the truth. Every angle had been carefully considered, every necessary loyalty bought beyond any danger of doubt. Asdrubael Vect's plan to achieve ascendancy demonstrated that his mind was like some intricate and unstoppable clockwork machine. By the time the plan had run its course, millions had been ground between its merciless gears. Vect, meanwhile, elevated himself to a position of total supremacy, borne to unimaginable heights upon an ever-growing mountain of cooling corpses. The seeds of the Imperial invasion were sown in the region of the galaxy called the Desiderian Gulf. This area of wilderness space was well known among the human starfarers of the Segmentum Tempestus for the number of spacecraft that had disappeared within its confines. General Imperial practice was to avoid it at all costs. Unknown to the Imperium, there existed a vast portal into a main arterial of the webway within Desiderian space, shielded by hollow fields that made it appear to be nothing more than a shimmer in the starlight, perhaps a result of gravitational lensing. Behind this portal lurked the pirate fleets of Commodore, waiting for unwary prey. The Drukhari's noble houses preyed upon Imperial shipping lanes only rarely, in order to escape retribution. Hence, the missing ships were always considered acceptable losses, or written off as bureaucratic errors of the administratum. Vect's first move was to increase the frequency of these piratical raids tenfold. He made it his Cabal's priority to capture every Imperial Navy warship and invade every human world within reach of the Desiderian portal. He tore apart the Astra Militarum regiments garrisoning the planets of the Desiderian system, devastated their fortifications, and disappeared with his living bounty into the depths of the Dark City, leaving nothing but utter ruin in his wake. This campaign saw the Cabal of the Black Heart grow rich in plunder and souls, though Vect's detractors thought him a fool for antagonizing the massive Imperial war machine. With its usual ponderous, bureaucratic slowness, the Imperium eventually reacted to the disappearances in the Desiderian Gulf. A strike cruiser belonging to the Salamanders chapter of the Adeptus Astartes was close enough to investigate. It was patrolling the edges of the Gulf in search of the sacred artifacts and relics of their Primarch Vulcan. Captain Focus of the Salamanders ordered his ship deeper into the Desiderian Gulf. After a short but violent exchange with Vect's Cabalite fleet, Focus's strike cruiser Forgehammer was crippled by haywire bombs and transported through the Desiderian portal right into the heart of the Dark City. The furor that resulted from this audacious capture set the spires of High Commodore aflame with new intrigue. A Space Marine captain was a great prize indeed, for such an individual could withstand extreme and prolonged mental and physical torture before divulging his vital secrets about Imperial defense. Before long, Vect found his Cabal's fleet in the Desiderian Gulf dwarfed by the armada of the Archon Lord Zelian. The Forgehammer, still rendered impotent by Vect's haywire field, was confiscated by Zelian, taken to High Commodore and analyzed by a long dissection process. In his arrogance, Lord Zellion had not reckoned with the resourcefulness of the Space Marines trapped within the stricken strike cruiser. The ship's Vox communications network had been shorted out by the haywire field, but unknown to Zellion, there remained a more pervasive method of communication available to the Astartes. Captain Focus's close friend, the gifted librarian Hestion, had sent a psychic request for aid as soon as the starship's systems had been disabled. Hestion acted as a living beacon to the rest of the Salamander's chapter, a beacon now trapped within the spires of Zellion's realm in the Dark City. When Lord Zellion sent the elite of his warrior court to bring the Space Marines to his torture chambers, they were met with far sterner resistance than anticipated. The Drukhari found it easy to carve through the hull of the strike cruiser and gain entrance to its dark corridors, but overpowering the Space Marines proved impossible. Lit only by the flashes of bolt gun fire, a desperate battle took place within the hull of the Forge Hammer until Astartes and Drukhari blood had mingled upon its hull plates. Zellion was quick to realize that he had underestimated his victims. He returned the salvage rights for the Astartes' starship to the Cabal of the Black Heart, appearing generous but actually intending to seize the Space Marines once the Black Heart had suffered the losses in taking them captive. Vect readily agreed, forming small strike forces of all those warriors in his cabal whom he suspected of disloyalty, and sent them to face the strike cruiser's defenders piecemeal. Vect's Cabalite warriors, triumphant on dozens of worlds, marched into the Forge Hammer without fear, but the battle lasted for solar days. Zellion was happy to let Vect drive his so-called Cabal to destruction, believing its Draken to be a fool for not attacking with all the force at his disposal in a single massive assault. Vect played a waiting game, feeding the disloyal elements of his cabal to the guns of the Space Marines to buy time, and even employing Comorite mercenaries with well-known ties to Zellion's court, all of whom were soon swallowed by the violence within the human strike cruiser. On the 16th solar day of the siege, the skies above High Comarach suddenly broke open. The Salamander's chapter had received the coordinates that had led them to their beleaguered battle brothers from the librarian Hestion's psychic broadcasts. The Desiderian portal had mysteriously been left fully operational, its guards slain and its controls locked so that it could not be closed. The full fury of the Imperium of Man thundered from the crackling jade-colored webway portal directly above Archon Zellion's personal spire. Through it came starships bearing the heraldry of not only the Salamanders, but also the badges of the Howling Griffons and the Silver Skulls chapters of Space Marines. 24 strike cruisers, each appearing like a chunk of Gothic architecture reshaped for war, hammered through the wide open portal into the shadowy skies of the Dark City. At their heart was the great battle barge Vulcan's Wrath, an immense spacecraft with broadside batteries that could flatten whole cities. Its prow was a vast jutting ram that ploughed straight into the spire where Zelian stood, crushing it like a hammer driven into a priceless sculpture. Meanwhile, the Drukhari overcame their surprise quickly. From nearby Port Shard came hundreds of exotic craft, each a needle-like splinter next to the slab-like Imperial vessels, but no less deadly for that. Void Raven bombers and razor-wing jet fighters careened out of their towering hangars like bats from a cave, descending in swarms to attack each Astartes strike cruiser. Though many were destroyed by the Imperial cruiser's broadsides, others systematically targeted the larger ship's guns with focused Void Lance fire and sustained hits from their disintegrator cannons. The Vulcan's wrath was struck by thick blasts of electromagnetic force produced by Port Shard's salvage spars, rendering the majority of its weapon systems useless. One by one, the Imperial ship's guns were silenced. But these were Space Marines, and they were nothing if not resourceful. Ejecting from each strike cruiser came drop pods, fired with such force that they were projectile weapons in their own right. The drop pods hurtled down, smashing through Drukhari fighter craft and Comorite star scrapers alike, each containing a squad of Space Marines who deployed upon impact with their weapons blazing. They left pure ruin in their wake as priceless Eldari statues shattered and the spires of the Dark City fell. The Astartes' counterattack robbed the Drukhari of the initiative. Within only moments of the drop pod assault, the Space Marines had established a perimeter in the obsidian-paved streets of the Krylar Quarter. Though they took constant fire from Kabbalite warriors and scourges that flew through the dark skies above, Astartes' power armor proved to be an effective barrier to the Drukhari's splinter weaponry. And yet it was not long before more of the Dark City's denizens joined the fight, drawn to violence and death like sharks to blood. Mass swarms of skyboard-mounted Hellions and Reaver jet bikers swooped down to rake and tear at the Space Marines, who returned fire, literally, with their Promethium-fueled flamers. The half-demon mandrakes and raider transports, loaded with Drukhari warriors, assaulted the Space Marines with claws, knives, and splinter pistols. Battle was joined from one side of High Comarach to the other, and the streets seethed with violence. Entire sections of High Comarach burned as the invading Space Marines cut down or incinerated each new breed of horror that assaulted them. Word spread quickly through the Dark City of the human invasion, and high up in the arenas, the gladiators of the witch cults mobilized for war. The Space Marines within the city were 500 strong, almost half the size of a full chapter, and they maintained a defensive perimeter throughout the Krylar Quarter. High Archon Krylak himself led a mass charge against the Astartes, intending to crush the invaders that were destroying his personal fiefdom. Yet his rampage was ultimately halted by a stray blast from a dark lance that vaporized him where he stood. As the Forge Hammer lay shackled by electromagnetic force high in the spires, the battle in the skies of the Dark City intensified. Zelian's last command had been to destroy the captive human ship, no matter the cost, for if mere humans recovered his prize, the Archon's authority and that of his fellow noble-born peers would be shattered forever. Flights of winged scourges armed with haywire blasters and heat lancers began to systematically destroy the captive ship, while a fleet of Ravager gunships forced the Space Marines who sought to rescue the vessel's battle brothers back into cover. Then, in a storm of light generated by their teleportation technology, Terminators from the Salamander's first company teleported directly onto the hull of the Forgehammer and returned fire. The Scourgers were driven back, and Captain Focus seized his chance. His warriors emerged from cover as a single force, sending a crack missile soaring into each of the 9 towering spars that held his craft captive with their beams of electromagnetic force. Miraculously, each missile triggered a chain reaction of explosions, and the burning spars crashed down into the streets below. The librarian Hestion summoned a psychic storm of his own, a raging inferno in the shape of a flaming drake that tore the Ravager gunships out of the sky one by one. The Forgehammer had been ravaged by the Drukhari assaults, but it was free at last from the Dark City's clutches. With a roar, the strike cruiser began to ascend into the sky and freedom. Far below, the Space Marines fighting in the Zelian Quarter were completely encircled as the full weight of Komorach was pressed against them, and warriors from dozens of Drukhari noble houses joined the defense of the city. Yet, the Space Marines' objective had been achieved, for the Forgehammer was free. A single, curt comm signal was sent, and within mere moments, the main bulk of the Space Marines in the Dark City teleported away in a brief burst of light. Those that had been cut off from the main assault gave their lives to buy their brethren time, or else were paralyzed by Drukhari hypertoxins and taken away to later fight and die as warrior slaves. Confusion reigned as the haywire fields that had shackled the Imperial spacecraft were disengaged one by one. The battle barge, Vulcan's Wrath, now joined by the badly damaged Forgehammer, fired its retros and disengaged itself from the ruins of what had been Archon Zelian's pride. The vast starship's engine blast flattened spires and starscrapers alike before the Space Marines made their escape. The entire Astartes fleet then passed through the still yawning webway portal above High Komorach and escaped triumphantly into real space. In the aftermath of the Imperial invasion, Komorach changed forever. The power vacuum left by the vanquished ancient Drukhari noble houses of High Komorach was quickly filled by Asdrubael Vect and his jubilant cabal of the Black Heart, who had proven their superiority to their rivals in the crucible of war. In the years that followed, Vect played politics like a true Machiavellian master of intrigue, forever asserting the meritocracy of the cabals over the ancient aristocracy of the Eldari noble houses. Eschewing all pretense at innocence, Vect ensured that word of his machinations became public. All would know that to stand in the way of Asdrubael Vect meant certain death, and in the centuries that followed, his grasp on power would inexorably tighten. And so it was that the cabal of the Black Heart rose to ascendancy over the Dark City in place of the old Eldari nobility, and Archon Vect's new position as the supreme overlord of Komorach and the Drukhari people was sealed.